Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you. I am so sorry that we were late. There was an accident on an exit on the freeway, etc. This weather, I hope everybody's okay there. And thank you for your patience. I remember speaking in this church before, what a very, very beautiful place this is. And always feels an honor to be here. And to be in a church like this is obviously to be reminded of the past, to be reminded of great traditions and big things. And I think American democracy is a big thing. And that's really what we're here to talk about tonight. There is a transformational, there is a way of looking at politics which is very surface and very shallow and very transactional and very much about the symptoms, but not about the root cause. And it is a perspective that is very rooted in 20th century thinking. And the mindset of the 20th century was very mechanistic. It was the product of Newtonian physics. It was the idea that the world is just a big machine. And if you don't like something going on in the world, you just tweak the machine. And within that mindset, there is a focus on the external world at the expense of the inner life. 21st century mindset is very different. The 21st century mindset is much more holistic, much more whole person, much more whole mind. There is a transformational view of things. We know that in order to really address what's happening in life, we have to do more than just look at what's happening on the outside, more than just what's happening on the level of the symptom, but what's happening on the level of the cause. One of the reasons I find it very interesting talking to the younger generation of Gen Z is because Gen Z is not even 20th century people. You weren't even born in the 20th century, or if you were there, you were just there for a few years as babies before you entered into this new millennium and this new century, and every century, by the way. Just as the 21st century is different than the 20th was different than the 19th. Now, most of us have heard the quote from Einstein that we would not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking that we were at them. We were at when we created those problems. Now, many of the problems that we face as a country are a product of some really bad ideas left over from the 20th century. But if we only look at these problems from the perspective we were at when we created the problems, all we will do is recreate them. So the transactional politics of the 20th century is not of interest to me. And one of the reasons it's not of interest to me is because I see it as toxic. I see it as more than dysfunctional. I see it as malfunctional. I see it as contrary and undermining of the deepest principles of American democracy. I think we need something new. I think the people who are stuck in that old kind of thinking, presuming to tell us that they are the only people qualified to fix the mess that they created, is totally absurd. But in order for us to have the deepest conversation, I want us to go back to the beginning of this country, to 1776. Now, in 1776, 56 very brave men signed the Declaration of Independence. And with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, something extraordinary was born into this world. It was a profound movement forward, not only politically, but also spiritually and morally. I remember when I was a child, I remember being taught about the divine right of kings. The idea that the king had given power, that God had given power to the king, to the queen, to the rich friends, the monarchy, and that it was somehow righteous, that everybody else in the society was basically just there to serve those few. With the idea of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it was posited into the political as well as social ethers of humanity that all men are created equal, and that all men have inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That government is instituted to secure those rights, not to diminish it, not to chip away at it, and that if in fact the government is not doing that job, then it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Those statements were very radical in 1776, and it is radical. Those statements are radical today. Now, those 56 men, by signing that document, were birthing into the world the possibility that such a society could exist, in which basically anybody could soar. Anybody should have the possibility of self-actualization. Anybody should have the possibility of spreading their wings, flying high, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. Now, that's where it began, but we're not stupid. We also know that that's where it also got very gnarly. Because out of the 56 men who signed the document, 41 of them were slave owners. Now, that's very interesting. It means we have always been both and. From the beginning, we have been both and. We have always been this kind of bipolar American mind. We have always been this inherent struggle. It's in the DNA of this country, this struggle, which has been with us every single generation, even enacted in our own. Between people willing to sacrifice, willing to live for, and willing to die for the principles of possibility so profound because they allow for the self-actualization of anyone who wants to go there, versus people who, for their own ideological and or financial purposes, have no intention of seeing those principles made manifest and have proven time and time again that they will do whatever it takes in order to make sure that they do not. But if you look at the trajectory of American history, we have responded. And I'd like to remind you that among white Americans, a lot of the early abolitionist movement emerged from the evangelical churches in New Hampshire. Other generations rose up, and they repudiated slavery. They responded to slavery with abolition. Other generations rose up, and they responded to the institutionalized suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. Other generations rose up, and they responded to the Gilded Age. They responded to it with the establishment of the labor movement. Other generations rose up, and they responded to institutionalized suppression of black people and segregation in the American South. I'm running for president because it's our turn now. Now, there's a lot for us to think about, because with us, it's not a specific institutional reality that we need to repudiate or reject. Today, it's an entire economic paradigm. It's not slavery, what we have to do is abolish it. Institutionalized suppression of women, what you have to do is pass an amendment giving women suffrage. No, it's an entire matrix of corporate powers. A matrix of corporate overlords who actually reenact the old landed gentry of aristocrats in England that were repudiated once and simply need to be repudiated again. But today, that corporate matrix of overlords is insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, oil companies, big oil companies, gun manufacturers, and defense contractors. And the way our government now operates, their short-term profits come before the safety and the health and the well-being of the American people. They exercise what is, in essence, economic tyranny over the people of the United States. And when Abraham Lincoln stood on the battlefield at Gettysburg and referring to the men who died there for the North, said that they had given the last full measure of devotion so that a government of the people and by the people and for the people would not perish from the earth. I'm running for president and my message to you is, it's perishing now. We are not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. That means a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, and few of the people. And this will not change unless we, the people, step in, because that system owns Washington. And when you have an unholy economic alliance between government and corporate power, that is soft fascism. Everything I just described to you is now baked into the cake. It is now the new status quo, and that status quo will not disrupt itself. The only way we can disrupt it now is for the people to step in, and it just so happens that the people who have the most say are the voters of New Hampshire. It's an extraordinary time that we're living in. And I know that you all know, I've been coming here for over several months, and I would often say, well, you have time to think about it. Now you actually don't have time to think about it. You just got till Tuesday. And what you see happening here, of course, is another corporate interest, a corporate interest which doesn't just chop wood and carry water for other corporate interests, but is actually one of them. And like all the others, seems to think that its money and its power is more important than your voice. And that corporate interest is the DNC. Yeah. However, if ever we're going to stand up, we may as well stand up right now. And when it comes to this primary season, beginnings are so important. Beginnings are so important because even though the DNC can strip me of any delegates, even though the DNC can invisibilize me in the press, get their partners in media, whether it has to do with CNN or MSNBC, to make sure don't let her on. Whatever you do, don't let that woman have a viral moment. Even though they can do all of the things that they do to smear, to attack, to make sure that I'm not on the ballots, whatever they can do. Let me tell you what they cannot do. They cannot strip you of the significance of the New Hampshire primary. And the people out in America aren't thinking about, well, will anybody get delegates? That's not where they live. But they are. We've all grown up asking, oh, what did New Hampshire say? What did New Hampshire say? So I really appreciate you being here tonight to give me an opportunity to tell you what I would do with the levers of presidential power were you to give me the honor of placing them in my hands. It's obvious, I think, from what I've already said, that I think we need to cut the cord. Not negotiate a little bit of change in here and there. I mean, cut the cord with an aberrational chapter of American history in which Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, neoliberalism, whatever you want to call it, an economic system in which short-term profit maximization for huge multinational corporate interests superseded your safety, your health, and your welfare, which means that those economic principles superseded democracy and superseded humanitarian values. And if I read the Declaration of Independence correctly, it's absolutely the most traditional thing in the world for a bunch of Americans, particularly Americans who live in a state whose motto is live free or die, to say elegantly and in a very sophisticated way, hell no. Now, for those of you who are young, you might think that what I'm about to describe to you is a fairy tale. And those of you who are older will join with me in reminding those of you who are younger, actually it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a land long ago and far away that I'm about to describe to you. It was called the 1970s. And I want to describe to you something about the 1970s and to remind those of you who remember it. The average American couple could afford a house. The average American worker could afford a car. The average American couple could afford a yearly vacation. One salary could support a family of 4. One parent could afford to stay home with the kids if they wanted to, and that couple could afford to send their kids to college. That was called a thriving middle class. In the last 50 years, there has been a major transfer of wealth, bluntly put, theft, of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. This has completely collapsed the middle class. We now have 39% of Americans who report in this, one of the richest countries in the world, that they regularly skip meals in order to pay their rent. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. 75 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. 68,000 Americans die every year from lack of health care. 1.3 million Americans ration their insulin. We are now at a place where people's lives are falling apart. We're at a place where 600,000 people are unhoused, where many of those people are actually working full time. We are at a time where we have tens of millions of young people who are living with college loan debts, and I have to tell you something. Debt is crippling at any age, but when I think of who I was when I was in my 20s, the idea that I would be carrying tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt, and what do these young people carry that debt for? They were trying to self-actualize. They were trying to make their lives better. That is theoretically what the American dream is all about. The last place that you should see the predatory tentacles of a malevolent strain of capitalism is in exploiting America's young people. You're supposed to set your young people, you're supposed to set your young people up to win. You do not cut them off at the knees. But that situation now in which stockholder value replaces all other stakeholders in a system, where it was moved, it was transitioned into a situation where money for stockholders took precedence over the workers, over the community, over the environment, over anything but the stockholder class. The idea was that they would become job creators, and then that would lift all boats. But it didn't lift all boats. We can certainly see that now. It kicked millions of people off the boats they were already on, and it left many people in an ocean without even a life vest. Why? Because the business model was there, never that they were going to be job creators. Their business model is not job creation. Their business model is job elimination, worker exploitation, union demonization, tax cuts for the very, very wealthy, and basically handing this government over, especially since the Citizens United decision, to the corporate powers who are the new donor class, who have turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. Those people's idea of someone qualified to be president is someone qualified to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. I'm not here because my qualification is that I know how to perpetuate and maintain a situation such as that. My qualification is I know how to call a system like that on the dysfunction and malevolence that it is, and help with you to disrupt that system and start America again. So, I'll tell you how we're going to do it, okay? We need to begin again. We need to begin, and Americans are hardwired for great things. It's kind of like an airplane. You see, it's a huge airplane, right, that soars through the sky in the most amazing way. But if it's just going down the runway, it's kind of clunky, It's kind of clunky till it gets to the place where it's ready to take off, and then it flies. That's how Americans are. We don't know how to play small. We're not. America does big things. We abolish slavery. We pass the 19th Amendment. We start great movements. The country itself, we were born out of an entrepreneurial project. And that's what we need to remember. We need to remember we've been trained to expect so little. Remember when they tell you, why don't we have universal health care when every other advanced democracy has universal health care? And they say, oh, it's complicated. It's not complicated. It's just so corrupt. And we don't have tuition-free college and tech school, which we had until the 1970s. We had a situation at University of Florida, Texas, and California. They say it's so complicated. No, it's not. It's just so corrupt. But I want to tell you something. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, not as big a majority, but still a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care and Medicare for all. A majority of Republicans and Democrats, not as big a majority, but still a majority, want tuition-free college and tech school. A majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, including gun owners, want common sense gun safety laws. You know what that means? That's the way we're going to win in 2024. If the Democratic Party will simply return to its roots of unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States, we'll not only beat Donald Trump or Nikki Haley or whoever they nominate, we will actually help repair this country. We will begin again, and I believe then the Democratic Party would rule for the next 50 years. But if we offer people any less, then I do not have good feelings about what will happen in 2024. Because 2024 is not going to be like 2020. 2024 is going to be like 2016. There was rage out there. There were people who knew that the economy is rigged against them, and they were angry about it. And there were two people who affirmed that belief, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And when someone came along and said, oh, no, we just need to finish the job after these last 8 years that have been such success, there were millions of Americans who said, what success, lady? I'm drowning here. And for us to try to beat Donald Trump by saying, things are going well. Really? For 20% of us, things are going well. For 80% of Americans, the idea that things are going well economically is like a slap in their face. It is viscerally contradictory to their actual experience. And just telling people to be afraid, be very, very afraid of the fascists at the door, Donald Trump. Listen, it's not that he's not that. And it's not that we shouldn't be deeply concerned. And if I wasn't as deeply concerned as the next person, I wouldn't be here. But it's not going to work this time to just tell people, ooh, he's bad, be very, very afraid. For those of you who do not wish to see Donald Trump back in the White House, my message to you is this. The electoral risk is not people voting for Donald Trump. People who love Donald Trump are going to vote for Donald Trump. They have a right to do that. They're going to vote for Donald Trump. You could indict him 91 more times. They're still going to vote for Donald Trump. You could throw him in prison. They're still going to vote for Donald Trump. The danger for the Democrats in 2024 is people staying home. And that's why the way to win in 2024 is to offer people something. Oh, I don't know, maybe the same things that are offered to the citizens of every other advanced democracy and which should be considered the rights of the people in every advanced democracy. An economic bill of rights. Number 1, universal health care. Number 2, tuition-free college and tech school. Number 3, complete removal through the Higher Education Act of those college loan debts simply because they are so immoral and should never have occurred. Subsidized child care. Paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, a guaranteed affordable housing, which at this point will take a kind of domestic Marshall Plan in housing. Housing is not just a crisis in America today, it's an emergency in America today. You would need 31,000 units just to get out of the hole in New Hampshire. We need to build between 10 and 20 million units of social housing and a guaranteed living wage. That begins to right the ship and return us to a level playing field. UBI is fine, and that's not UBI. I have a UBI program on my website. I hope you will go to Marianne2024.com, look at the issues pages. But at the same time, let's not kid ourselves. That's not in and of itself going to correct the flaws of an unfettered vulture capitalism. Next thing, we have to proactively wage peace. We need to declare peace on Earth. We need to imagine this planet without war 100 years from now and reverse engineer from there. John F. Kennedy said, if we do not get rid of war, war will get rid of mankind. We already have 12,000 nuclear bombs on the planet, 7,000 of them are ours. So what I would like is a peace academy. Just like we have a military academy, we will have a peace academy. We will have a Department of Peace. They play war games, we're also going to play peace games. They train an army of military personnel. We're also going to train an army of peace builders. Listen, I take the role of Commander-in-Chief very soberly and very, very seriously. But I look at the US military like a surgeon. If the United States needs surgery, then we need to have the best surgeon. And we need to have the best surgeon on hand at all times. There's no doubt about that. But a reasonable person tries to avoid surgery if possible. As it is, we have a forever war machine. Washington, D.C. is riddled with warmongers. It's called the blob. And even though you and I look at Iraq and realize what a spectacular moral and military failure it was, even though you and I look at the last 20 years in Afghanistan and see it as a great moral and military failure, make no mistake, they say it, given the trillions of dollars that they made, that crowd sees all that as a big success. We need a president who is not so easily snookered by the manipulative crowd that runs the defense establishment in Washington. Before I get off that topic, I do want to point out something that some of you might not realize. Peace building is an actual thing. There are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate in any area, whether it's a corner of a US city or another corner of the world. These factors, when present, mean there will be a higher level of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. And the 4 factors will not surprise anyone. Number 1, greater educational opportunities for children. Number 2, greater economic opportunities for women. Number 3, a reduction of violence against women. And number 4, a reduction of unnecessary human despair. That's what we need to do. We need to proactively wage peace. As Franklin Roosevelt said, we need to do more than end war. We need to end the beginnings of all wars. And nothing begins wars like large groups of desperate people. Anybody should be clear about that by now. Next thing we need is a Department of Children and Youth. We have millions of children in this country. We have children who are in elementary school are on suicide watch. We have in public schools all over the United States trauma rooms. And we should ask ourselves, what is happening in this country that for millions of American children, childhood itself is such a trauma? We now know things about the human brain that we didn't even know 15 years ago. We know, among other things, that 90% of brain development is in the first 5 years of life. One of the things I want to do is to convene the greatest minds on early childhood. This is the deal. For those of you who are young, who are just going to be coming into your full blossoming in 20 years, the only way that we can guarantee the possibility of that full blossoming is if we take much better care of our 10-year-olds today. And you think we have a mental health crisis today? Oh, great, let me tell you. Just think what it's going to be when you have a generation coming into maturity who used to pray every morning before elementary and middle school that they would not be shot at school today. I would be the most child-centric president we would ever see. In my mind, children are the greatest collateral of unfettered capitalism. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage in Washington. They're not old enough to vote, so they are not a constituency. We need a mother in the White House, and you can take that however you want to take it. Next thing I want to do is we need a mass mobilization from a dirty economy, a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. The first thing I will do as president is to cancel the Willow Project. For anybody still under the ruse that has been propagated that President Biden is the climate president, let's be very clear. It is true that the president, through the Inflation Reduction Act, has done some really fine benefits of fine investments in green energy. However, it's a classic purse thief technique. Look here and don't look there. This is the issue. Yes, it is true that those investments in clean energy are there, but there are many more investments in dirty energy. The president has actually given more oil drilling permits than even Donald Trump did. Also, he has okayed the Willow Project as well as the LNG project in Alaska. We need to go right into a mass mobilization for a just transition. We will create millions of jobs in doing so, and if I have to, I will declare a climate emergency to make it happen. One last agenda item I want to mention to you, and then we can talk about anything that you'd like. It is time to end America's war on drugs. It was begun in 1971 by Richard Nixon. He said at the time that drugs were public enemy #1. when John Ehrlichman, one of his aides who served time in prison because of the Watergate scandal, when he came out of prison, he spilled the beans about a lot of things, and one of them was this. He said that Nixon absolutely knew that drugs were not public enemy number one. This was, among other things, an attack on Black America. This is the deal. When I was in college, there were 300,000 people in prison in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. Among other things, not only has the war on drugs and the $1 trillion that we have spent on it, not only has it clearly exacerbated the problem, not solved it, it has also fed the machinery of the prison industrial complex. Almost half of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. Most of those people should be home with their children. This is the deal. We need to come out of the 20th century and the bad ideas of the 20th century. We need to do what nations like Portugal do. We need to treat drug addiction not as a criminal issue, but as a health issue. I don't want a drug czar. I want a recovery czar. For the $100 billion that we spend every year on the drug war, for a fraction of that, we could build a world-class network of recovery options. Just like in my whole health plan, which you can see at Marianne 2024. I do want Medicare for all and universal health care, but I don't just want that. I also want policies that proactively make us a healthier society. And the same is true with drugs. I don't want to just punish the addict. I want to help the addicts who wish to get sober. That is what we should be doing as a society. I agree with Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, when he said that the purposes of governmental policy should be to help people. And so, as you can hear, I don't want just a little change. This country needs to turn around. We are headed towards the iceberg. The Republicans zipping right there, and the corporatist Democrats going there more slowly, and they would hit it at a different angle. I only want to run for 4 years. First of all, because a baby boomer should not be president in 2028. But I'll tell you something else. I don't want to be in the White House and have to even think about whether or not, if I do something, whether or not it will help me get reelected. I'm not playing that game. That's not why I'm there. I won't be able to turn the ship entirely around in those 4 years, but I could get us around the curve. And then you hand it over to a younger generation who can take it from there. We do not need another technocrat as president. We don't need another political car mechanic. That's not the problem. The problem is we are on the wrong road. We don't need another technocrat. We need a visionary. Franklin Roosevelt said the primary responsibility of the presidency is not administrative, it's a moral vision, moral leadership. We need vision. We need a visionary. I may not be, actually, the greatest visionary in the United States, but I can tell you this, I'm the only one running for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Very kind of you. Thank you. Thank you.